and at least to me, this book deals a great deal with existentialism and where are we going? What is the meaning of anything? And obviously, though this is not dealt with in the book, I think that's what religion seeks a great deal, to try to say, what is this all about? In the case of a book itself, and not to over personalize it, but I guess I personally have been involved one way or another through living experiences, through the Somoza regime in Nicaragua, the advent of the Chavez takeover or elections, and then governorization in Venezuela, and then have spent almost 34 years working on Cuba. And so I guess I found so many ways to identify in watching these various societies with the frustration and the bureaucracy and the struggle to somehow try to make some sense out of what's happening. And given that Kafka was writing this in the 1920s, before communism was really taking hold in a big way in Europe, and before Nazism took hold in a big way in Germany, and I guess thinking about one other thing that certainly he would not have known about, and that is that his three surviving sisters all died in the Holocaust because they were all sent to Auschwitz. That I found the book a difficult book to read because it's not just doesn't have a flowing literary style. But I found it a very compelling book, and one that I felt that had a great deal of contemporary meaning to it, and what we're going through today in a lot of our different societies. And I guess those were my general takes on the book, and probably at that time it's good to turn it over to everybody else.
Go ahead.
I do want to say that it was actually written in 1914, beginning in 1914, and over the next couple of years. He started writing it within a week of World War I being declared. So it was more of that time than the 20s.
That's right. It was published posthumously in 1925.
Yeah, you're right.
But it makes it a mystery about why he left that one chapter incomplete. Seems like if he'd been only writing it in the 20s, but if he started it that long ago, I wonder what that's about.
And which chapter is incomplete?
It's hold on, I've got it in my notes.
I think I saw something about it.
There are multiple incomplete chapters that were not included in the official version.
Yeah.
Chapter 8.
But the one with the lawyer is actually acknowledged as incomplete, but is still included in the official version. But he didn't complete hardly any of his novels. They were all to be completed in some indefinite future. And if he'd had his way, they would all have been destroyed.
Yeah.
Right.
So Mark, why don't you continue with general thoughts? So we each get some general thoughts in before the specifics.
So yeah, I have been meaning to dive a little more into Kafka, because what little I've read, I've liked. I like the spirit of it. And I like the black humor of it as much as the despair. Let's see. I guess my overall comments, I mean, I did take the advantage of the time to look a little bit into, I had a bio from an older bio of Kafka, so I've managed to look a little into that. So I have a little bit more background than I normally would on it. But my feeling on the existentialism is, I find his sensibility is so deliberately dreamlike that makes it. I mean, he's an antecedent influence for the existentialist, but I think he's an absurdist for sure, with an amazing existentialist sensibility of being able to look at, analyze every aspect of his life and thinking, and interpreting the things around him. But I see it as a little different from maybe he's a forefather for existentialism, but I see that he takes it into different directions that are more fanciful and deliberately imaginative than merely existential.
Well, I found this most beautiful little copy. Oh, I have to hold it up back here, otherwise you won't see it, it'll be blurred. It's only this tiny book, and it's so beautiful. It's like a missile. It's got a little thing, a little cloth thing that, I don't know. I just loved it. It was hard to read though. It was a very small type. So I back and forth between reading it online and then also reading that. I didn't find it difficult to read. I found it like a page turner. And I actually thought that the disconnectedness and the lack of a narrative flow was exactly the right thing for the story, because everything takes him by surprise. I mean, it takes the reader by surprise too. I mean, you never know what the hell is going to happen next. And it never turns out as you may have guessed. It just never does, not a single time. And I think I made a couple of marks about things that I really thought stood out. I love this line: correct understanding of a matter and misunderstanding of the same matter are not mutually exclusive. That to me tells you the whole story of the book.
Well, Robert,
Yeah,
that is very logical from a legal point of view, which
Yeah.
may, there's a story about Blackacre and Whiteacre, and people agree that they're going to meet by the ship, and one of them goes to the ship called Whiteacre, and another one goes to a ship called Blackacre. So there was a total understanding
right.
of what the agreement was and a total misunderstanding of how to implement the agreement.
Right. Yeah.
And
I'm sorry.
yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt your
No.
thoughts.
No. That's fine. I agree. I kept on thinking too that a lot of the book, as I read it, made me think of the Midrashic study, because there's a lot of mention of commentaries, so many commentaries, and that's what Midrash is all about. Is like a statement and then commentaries and then commentaries on the commentaries, and just goes back. And that what ends up being really what the whole legal system at its best is about. People disagreeing, but it's more about absolutely nothing, it seems to me. Anyway, that I think the book is extraordinary, and I loved reading it, and I can't wait to talk more about it with everybody.
Did anybody, I kept on thinking Bleak House as I've read.
Oh yeah, Jarndyce and Jarndyce.
Yeah, from there. In fact, I had more fortitude these days. I'd plow back through that, but I don't think I do.
Oh, I love that book.
Yeah. And I mean, it was my sort of favorite line was, all this talking did more to make Kay impatient than persuade him. And I mean, it was just, loved how everything about it is just a piling up of minutia of documentation, and until there, it had to be relief when he was finally murdered.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding.
Well, I'll jump in then, if I may. Jay, I thought that your opening on what you wrote us about the Che and this gentleman Navarro's conversation was phenomenal. It was just phenomenal. I'm curious. Have you read this book, Tokoya?
Oh, Tokayo? Yes.
Yeah. Is it in English or is it in Spanish?
It's in English. It's out of print, but they still have some old copies on Amazon.
Well, you know, I'm having grown up in Miami and been very immersed in the Cuban community. I'm not Cuban, but I'm very, very much involved with the Cuban community. This told so much about how dictatorships justify themselves. I mean, the quote that you did, you know, when he drops him off at his home and he looks around, you know, I mean, Che looks around and, you know, it's a big house and there's golf. And so this guy, it's good that he got out of Cuba, even though from what I'm reading here, he was originally part of, certainly in favor of Castro. Is that correct? Yeah.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. I've met a lot of, Cubans that at first were in favor of Castro because there was hope. He gave a lot of people hope. But at any rate, I'm going to look forward to reading Tokoya. As the other thing about this particular book I found was that he reacted to the absurdity in a very absurd way. He totally overestimated his importance and his ability to fight something that he could not fight, even if he had done everything he was supposed to do. I think they would have put a bullet in his head at the end anyhow. But he certainly lowered any chance he had to survive. So probably as much as anything else, he overstated his own comfort level. And that was repeated, I guess in Western Europe during World War II, where people identified themselves as Austrian or German or Hungarian, Jews, and thought that there could be two points of view when there really was only one point of view. So I wonder what people think. Could he have survived could he possibly have gotten out of this had he realized the relative strength that he had vis-a-vis this unnamed force? Question mark.
Yeah. Who knows what the capabilities of that force were? I mean, everything is dubious, either underestimated or overestimated. It's nothing is what it really is. So it's very hard to tell. It's a house of all of mirrors.
Well, and I think that's one of the insidious things about dictatorships, that as they set up this whole structure to maintain themselves in power, that you try to keep the people as confused and as confined and as intimidated as possible,
Right.
so that they can't effectively somehow react against the system. And the bureaucracy of the system, when it's institutionalized, I think reinforces that. And that's something that came across here, that it was the doorkeeper had his little piece, and the judge had his little piece, and the washerwoman had her little piece, and the clerk had his little piece, and the lawyer, and they were all, at the end of the day, they were all just kind of slaves to the system.
Yeah,
And I guess the question, yeah, really. And the only person, ironically, who kind of wasn't was Joseph. And as it points out, he was the one free man in this thing,
Yeah,
and the free man didn't survive.
Well, but to me, it was the picture of two bureaucracies. The one that Joseph was a part of, and one that he was an alien to. And you, there, at least I saw glimpses of the court and everything that he was doing, and as well. The way he manipulated time, how his treatment of his customers and so forth, not to the same extreme, but he was really doing. You really do. He was just a bureaucrat who was all of a sudden being thrust into another person's bureaucracy, and that. And while he could control portions of the one that he was part of, he was lost in the other.
I think Ben has to give his opening, but I really think that you're onto something there, David, that his own absurdity is as startling and recurrent as the absurdity of the world around him. And I mean, I particularly love it in his relationship with the women.
yes,
But,
yeah.
but Ben, you haven't had your opening salvo yet.
Oh, sorry, Ben.
Not at all, not at all. So Jay, great pick. This is such a psychological mystery novel of the first order. And interestingly, the subject is pretty downer. And you pick it up expecting this is going to be a tough read. Just the opposite. And it was actually kind of like Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich. It's a tough subject, but it's handled so masterfully.
Mhm.
It is so seductive and persuasive. It's a nightmare world that Kafka creates, but he creates it with such mastery. And interestingly, and I look forward to Mark's and others' comments on the bio and more of the process, because for some reason, this read, I decided I'm not going to read anything about Kafka, his life, or what he actually believed or didn't believe. I'm just going to go off of what the book says. But it seems to hang together so well, even though it seems to be a patch job. It was edited posthumously, put together, and it's incredible work. And the subject, I would just say, overall, seems to me the oppressiveness of modernism. And maybe we'll get into that more. Now, for me, actually, this is my third time reading. I actually have the copy that I got in Reading, England. And I actually date sometimes, and I read it in Reading, England in 1980. And I just want to say that I think, and I hope this is true, but I think this might be the first time that I've actually grasped the book. So it took the third read to perhaps get somewhere where I'm a little more comfortable what I think the book's about. And not to jump to the last question too quickly, but I just want to add, what an appropriate book. Just a few days ago, I read an article by an English writer called Theodore Dalrymple, who's kind of the English version of William Carlos Williams. He's a former doctor. And his recent article was titled "Freedom Betrayed by a Population of Digital Snitches." And he concludes with a paragraph, "Increasingly, we must live as if our lives were evidence in a forthcoming trial by yet unknown accusers." And he said that without making any reference to the trial. In fact, the only book he mentions is Dostoevsky's The Devils. So great pick. I'm looking forward to tonight's discussion and all of your insights.
Well, I've spent a lot of years being a lawyer to politicians. And the first thing I tell them when they're elected is act as if every conversation you're having is being recorded and can be listened to by the U.S. attorney or the state's attorney who will not have your best interests at heart. It won't necessarily be out to get you, but because people sometimes say things they shouldn't say. That's an interesting point you made about a trial somewhere in the future that you don't know about, because I think we're all living that way now because we're all living in a fishbowl. If I go over and happen to kiss a woman and someone takes a picture of it, depending on the angle that that picture is, it looks like I'm doing something incorrect vis-a-vis my wife. Can't say anything to anybody anymore. So I do think that we're all subject to unknown charges that we don't know anything about. There's just a lot of tripwires in life.
Yeah.
And Charles,
I'm moving
kissing
to
a
the
woman,
top of, excuse me?
yeah, not just kissing a woman, just smelling her hair could get you into trouble.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I am frightened to death to speak to women at this moment. You look lovely. What do you mean I look lovely, you lousy son of a bitch?
Okay, wait a second. Let's keep the language nice. Miriam's now coming in.
Oh, good.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you.
Miriam, hi.
Hi, Miriam. Well, our average IQ has gone up 22 points. Meaning no disrespect to the other people.
Miriam, we don't want to put it right on you, but I just finished my preliminary thoughts, and so you just arrived at the exactly right time. If you'd like to share yours.
I always found this book excruciating, and I was just saying to my partner here that it excruciating and paranoid. And his response was, for good reason, it's paranoid. So that's my overall. I've always found this book very, very difficult because of that. There's no escape. And people are always watching. In the opening scenes across the courtyard or whatever, there's a window and there's people watching him. And then, of course, in the awful last scene, there's a figure in a window, again, watching, but helpless to do anything to save him. So for all of those reasons, I find the book very, very difficult. I would say that I believe that Kafka's shorter works are better, but that may be just because the trial just brings me into this world in which there's no hope. And in the very, very last scene, his executioners, they actually twist the knife. That always stayed with me since the first time I read the book. It's not enough that they kill him, but they have to twist the knife as well.
Like a dog.
Yeah,
Like a dog.
And the other thing is, I had an old copy of the book and the various passages that I had marked and what I wrote in the margins. There are a couple of places in the narrative where Joseph K. can escape. And right at the very beginning, he says something, I could just walk away, but he doesn't. And then he also says it's futile to resist. Futile to resist.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's a lot more we could say. I'd love to hear what other people have to say.
Well, I want to let Jay go through his questions, but I want to ultimately ask the question, what is it he's resisting? Because even though it's tempting to look through the lens of totalitarianism or dictatorship. He was living in at the collapse of the Habsburg monarchy when this was written. And after this was written, when he was still, well, I think he was probably done writing it by the time the First World War ended, and it became the flowering of Czech democracy, the first time ever. So I think it was more personal things that he was compelled to and dealing with than political things. But Jay, why don't you steer us through?
Can I just ask Mark one question though, based on what you've read about from the biography? He was living in Prague in a German community. Were they all, was it a whole Jewish German community or what? I don't understand exactly what it was. I didn't know anything about it.
Oh, mostly
Go ahead.
Jewish.
Mostly Jews, you said, Miriam?
He was from a Jewish family.
Right, but he mentions the fact that there's a large German-speaking community living in Prague, and I just wondered if it was predominantly Jewish.
Oh, Prague was not predominantly Jewish, no.
No, but I mean the German-speaking part of it. I don't know.
I don't think
He
so.
was part of a German Jewish diaspora, and a lot of. I didn't read the whole biography. I read from from his, I guess, coming of age until the end, and I skimmed through a lot too. But basically, there was a lot of times when he had relations with people in Vienna and Berlin and other cities across Germany, and there was a episode where, I mean, his dating life was quite the story. But one of the many relations was with someone who was from the other side of the divide, a rebel from the non-Jewish Czech elite, side of things. And so it's, but he was always conscious of being a minority, and a minority within the minority because he didn't believe in God, and very much wrestling with a lot of Jewish issues his whole life. And so a lot of that is, you could have an interesting read of this from the Jewish perspective if you wanted to.
Yeah, I guess some other things. From a Jewish perspective, he apparently flirted a little bit with Zionism, because he actually talked about moving to Palestine and opening up a restaurant. And he even, as I saw in one of his, I guess in some biographical information, that he even wrote, "Why do I continue to live in this society if they hate us so much?"
Mm.
So I think there was certainly something of that. And then the other thing, he had amorous relationships with, I guess, 2 or 3 different women in his life, and none of them turned out very well. And that may have somewhat been reflected in the relationship that Joseph K. had with this, his encounters with at least 3 different ladies within the book itself, that they were somehow intensively unfulfilling relationships. And so this may have had something to do with his own personal life as well. And then one other thing that he wrote in a letter to his father, he said, "What this is really all about is to show how much I really hate you." So I'm not sure exactly how or if it does fit in, but apparently in Kafka's mind, somewhere it seems to have fit in. But I think the point's well made, and I think I was mistaken in what I was saying. That, yeah, it was, I guess, the absurdity. Well, I don't know. Maybe the absurdity came out of World War I. I'm not really sure. just like with Colette when we were reading it, and the whole thing about what were the, and I realized this was 1914 going in, I'm not sure, I guess right after the war. I'm not sure about that. But somewhere, and maybe this was this question of, okay, he was a minority within a minority, and he found the world to be somewhat absurd, and I guess his health wasn't very good either. But somewhere the absurdity of what he manifests was a reflection, I don't know, reflection of something, and I guess and maybe in some ways more contemporary, which I find interesting. It maybe it didn't quite reflect what was going on, and is more of a commentary of some of the things that we see today than what he saw then. I'm not really sure.
Looking at your first question, Jay, a wise man sent me a definition of existential. And the definition, the sense of dread, disorientation, confusion, or anxiety in the face of an apparently meaningless or absurd world.
Yeah.
And so there we because I think existential and absurd has come up quite a bit already in the descriptions of this, and there it seems to wrap together in that one definition. So I think I would say yes to question one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I saw that definition as well. And I think he fits right into it. Yes.
Well, I got that definition from you.
Oh, you got it from me. Well, it certainly was well written.
It's not only a meaningless world, it's a cruel world.
Mm-hmm.
It's terribly, terribly cruel. And sly. All those people who speak to him, most of them are sly and insinuating. It's like a nightmare.
It is a nightmare, yeah.
It's a nightmare. And you want to think of, traditional ways of portraying men. He is, what could you say about his masculinity? There's a kind of terrific impotence here. And I don't mean that literally.
Yeah.
I mean it.
Unassertiveness, maybe.
Unassertiveness. What's the sense of, he knew immediately, well, I could leave, but he doesn't. I could just open the door and walk away, but he doesn't. And then later on, he says the impossibility of resistance.
Right. And then he takes that tour of the court building in the attic, and that woman and that fancily dressed guy,
Yeah.
In front of them, he starts to have the vapors. Like he just becomes overcome with it's like an anxiety attack is what I thought it was, because he's suddenly aware that nothing connects with anything else, and he's feeling as if he's going to faint, and he has to be propped up.
Yeah.
And those people seem to him to be kind, but I think you're right, Miriam. They're not. They're manipulative, and nobody is really kind in this.
And
Anybody.
The theme of emasculation starts right away on the first page, right? Because it says, "Who are you?" asked Kay, half raising himself in bed. So who reacts that way to a man who has invaded your bedroom and woken you up?
I don't actually know who wrote the screenplay. I should have looked it up. But in the film, there's some very funny moments at the beginning during the first encounter with those two guys. And they're looking around his room, and they point to this record player, and they say, "What is that? What are you listening to?" And he said, "Oh, that's my phonograph." I think it was a brilliant line. It wasn't in the book, as far as I could tell. But
Is this the Orson Welles version from 1960 something?
Yeah.
I saved that to watch it. I wish I watched it.
Tony Perkins is he's like the perfect blonde in a Hitchcock movie.
Right.
I would guess that Orson Welles had a strong thumb on the screenplay if he didn't actually write most of it.
I'm sure he probably did, but I've seen it so long ago. I was in college, and I'd like to see it again, but I can only remember, as I said before, 5 advocates. I have 5 advocates. And I remember too, a scene with lots of rolls of paper. It may have been in the courtroom with Orson Welles, but I can't remember exactly what his part was.
There's a scene in the cathedral that interested me too. He's in the cathedral and he's looking at a painting and he sees this knight, and then he finds the figure of Christ entombed. And I thought how unusual for Kafka to put that in, and it really stands out. Is Joseph K. a Christ-like figure? I wouldn't go that far, but he certainly is entombed. The whole novel is claustrophobic. And
Isn't that-
what's interesting, of course, Kafka was very ill with tuberculosis and neurosis. So that certainly affected him. He was really sentenced to die. There wasn't much that he could do about it. But he led a very active business life. I believe he had a law degree and he worked for an insurance company, and he was very highly placed and apparently a wonderful administrator. And I remember talking about Kafka with a group of friends once, and we had discovered, I think it was when the biography came out, that he was 6 feet tall or taller. We had imagined him as a little Nebuchadnezzar type, but he wasn't. He was, physically, he was quite, before he became ill, he was quite robust. He suffered, he had a Philistine father who really didn't understand him at all. It was very forceful.
So I do want, before we move away from that first question, I just want to say that as to the existentialism, there's existentialism in there ahead of its time, but there's also surrealism in there. And I don't think those are the same thing. And surrealism didn't really come out until after World War I, but he starts writing it the first week of World War I. So, it's not like he's inspired by, those events. It's like it's in him. So the dimensions of it being so surrealistic, dream logic, make that are as strong to me as the existential thread in it. And so I think he's just a pure original who had a lot of influence. He definitely influenced existentialism in a big way. Sartre cited him.
But there
anyway.
were movements toward surrealism in this time. People like Moholy-Nagy, wasn't he in the late 20s?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, he's writing in 1914 to 1915, 16. So,
okay.
You can conflate all the times, but he's ahead of his time because he's dealing with things that are so individual, and they're both the logical side, the irrational side, the relationship side, the relationship to not just women, but to the world. It's all there, but it's not necessarily fueled by the things that later are easily explained by him.
Yeah.
Because he was really ahead of his time in how acutely he could translate a very unique, alienated, and isolated and observant view of the world.
And he influenced not just Sartre. Camus said it states the problem of the absurd in its entirety. So it seems like it influenced all of the existentialists.
I don't think we can come too soon to the gatekeeper story. That could take us hours to dissect.
Well, number 2 is was it a precursor to totalitarianism and all that came later? And I would say absolutely it was. But again, I don't think it was influenced by it. I just think it happens to be able to explain absurd political structures.
Yeah, and to add to that, the book's very first sentence, which is someone must have been telling lies about Joseph K. For without having done anything wrong, he was arrested one fine morning. And that immediately reminded me of one of the best films ever made, which was the 2006 The Lives of Others, about the Stasi.
That's a wonderful film. Yeah.
Yeah. And so again, Kafka way ahead of his time.
Well, the Nazis and the communists didn't invent totalitarian. They just modernized it. You know, you can think of the Count of Monte Cristo, and he's charged, he's sent away. He doesn't, you know, he's not guilty of anything other than trying to follow a wish, and he's sent away to protect the person who sends him away. You know, communism came after slavery in Russia. Nazism, and I'm not, God knows, I'm not speaking in favor of either of them, came after a terrible time in Germany. It wasn't totalitarian, but it was somewhat of an anarchy with, you know, with riots in the street and incredible poverty. And so I mean, I think absolutely he was ahead of his time in expressing certain things, but he didn't invent it. It's been there forever. It's just gotten better. It's gotten more modern. There's better ways to keep track of people and control people. The
But I think
Chinese.
what his real skill is the construction of the story
Yeah.
that reveals what's happening. I mean, the way it is just like little incremental, and it moves back and forth, and you follow the logic because you're trying to understand what this man is going through, and you want to root for him in a way at the beginning. I mean, if somebody's lying about you, you want to support them and get rid of the lies. You want to understand their story, and it just the little development of it in every way, and then the introduction of yet another peculiar character just adds more levels of uncertainty. And like that girl in the lawyer's office, his caretaker, what was her name? Lenny?
Lenny.
Yeah.
Odd name. But anyway, she was the most peculiar thing. I was really curious to follow her, but then she is so oppressively on top of him all the time. It reminded me of that film about the gay couple, and he loses his lover, and the woman who's their best friend goes after him like gangbusters. You know that movie. It was like it was a couple of years back. It's a wonderful film. Anyway, don't worry about it. But she was just glued to him, and he liked it. He really was. I think he was just looking for sex all the time, but he never has it at all in this book. Not once.
Doesn't he say at one point that she's attracted to victims? She's attracted to
Yes.
people who are accused.
Right. And the only person he seems to have an interest in is this woman who works all night at a wine bar. So they never can get together. There's no connection there.
Well, about the narrator character, I mean, this book is interesting. Another perhaps innovation. It's like a stream of consciousness, right? Or an early one. And again, referring back to the death of even Ilyich, it's so involving. It's like, and I'm pulled in, and yet at times, Joseph, he's so conceited at times, and he jumps to the most absurd conclusions at times. You can see him like knifing himself in the back. He says, well, obviously. And we have a slight remove, and we look at him and go, I don't think so, Joseph. It's like, what rat hole are you going down there? as he tries to save himself with complete, like almost zero hope.
Yeah.
Well, is Joseph an anti-hero or is he a what?
He's a victim.
I think he's a hero.
You think he's a hero?
He struggles. He's an idiot on a certain, in a certain level. But he is, you know, that he seems to exercise some free will, even if dangerously.
It could be argued even that Don Quixote was a bit of an idiot. So there you go.
See, I sort of think of all this as everybody's a victim in these enormous machineries of bureaucracies. It's almost like Modern Times, the movie.
Yeah, yeah.
Everything, you know, they've created a monster in terms of identities, of roles, of that just have a life of its own, and everyone, you know, from the policeman who eats the breakfast and it becomes fat,
Yes,
and so
yes.
to there is victimized by that. And I'm just, see, to me, this is not the story about the beginning of totalitarianism. It's really the collapsing of the Victorian bureaucracy, which had sort of grown through the 19th century to the time it becomes absurd. And that's what we're seeing there, more so than a picture towards the future, that everything has become so regimented in terms of roles, responsibilities, and so forth, that they just now are collapsing in on themselves.
Well, you know, of course, you don't die from this. So that's a big difference between Joseph's experience and all of our daily experience. But you call somebody and you push 2 and you push 3 and you push 4. And do you want somebody to talk to? You push 8. You wait 5 minutes, somebody comes on, you tell them what you need, and either it's the wrong person or they can't help you at all. And then I love the you know, it's like rote. How else can I help you?
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
say, but you haven't helped me the first time.
Right.
So what are you asking me? So I felt like Joseph was on this kind of like every door he knocked was the wrong door.
Yeah.
Every place, you know, he went was the wrong place.
It's sort of like that also that line, please pay attention because our options may have changed.
Right,
Of
right.
course they've changed. Of course they haven't changed.
Well, but it seems to me in the book, yes, he keeps going to the different doors and he chooses the wrong doors, but it sort of applies to me that there are no right doors.
Right.
Yeah. How can I help you again or more? You
Right.
know, I mean, he's being criticized for not understanding. Don't you understand what's happening? No. Well, you should understand. Well, can you explain it to me? No, it's too simple. Why would I explain it to you?
And in the case of the lawyer, he is constantly making up stories that you can't follow. And they imply that he has such an insider view of all this that he must be trusted. And that's the only argument he has. And no matter how many times he repeats it and stretches it out over time, that's all he can say.
I love the character that's had this lawyer for 8 years or something like
Yeah.
Oh, the merchant, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, there's an expression among defense lawyers, which, you know, I don't do criminal law, but everybody's considered innocent until proven indigent.
I was interested in how askew Kay's perceptions are. Like when he's looking at something, he doesn't quite get it. There's one scene in which he finally peers into a corner and a clerk or somebody or another lawyer comes out of the, you know, in this ghostly way out of the corner. He's been sitting there all along
Right.
watching. which is really so unsettling that you could be in a room and in a corner, in a dark corner, there's somebody who's been there all along and that somebody is watching. And then a very unsettling scene is this one. I've got a modern library, so this is in 58. This is near the beginning of the book. Here, Kay was interrupted by a shriek from the end of the hall. He peered from beneath his hand to see what was happening, for the reek of the room and the dim light together made a whitish dazzle of fog. It was the washerwoman whom Kay had recognized as a potential cause of disturbance from the moment of her entrance. Whether she was at fault now or not, one could not tell. All Kay could see was that a man had drawn her into a corner by the door and was clasping her in his arms. Yet it was not she who had uttered a shriek, but the man. His mouth was wide open and he was gazing at the ceiling. A little circle had formed round them. The gallery spectators nearby seemed to be delighted that the seriousness which Kay had introduced into the proceedings should be dispelled in this manner. So there are the spectators, and he can't make things out. Everything is in this whitish dazzle of fog. And he doesn't, I mean, this sort of brings home, he doesn't seem to understand what's going on. And of course, on the other hand, it's a very sexual scene and very, very disturbing. On that theme, when he goes to visit the painter, and the painter is, remember the artist he's hired to do the portrait of the judges? I mean, Kafka is really wonderful on this. And there's this group of depraved little girls. He describes them as innocent and depraved.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's all these touches, through the book that are like that. But this one, I found this particular scene was particularly unnerving. The man,
And then
I apologize. I'm going to have to leave. I've got an 8 o'clock Zoom. It's great to see you all. I
Hi,
enjoyed
David.
it. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you, Dave.
Okay, nice to meet you too. Bye-bye.
Hi.
But reality is very unsettling. I mean, he's describing the faces around him. Their little black eyes darted furtively from side to side. Their beards were stiff and brittle, and to take hold of them would be like clutching bunches of claws rather than beards. But under the beards, and this was Kay's real discovery, badges of various sizes and colors gleamed on their coat collars. They all have badges, magistrates. But really, beards as claws?
Yeah, yeah.
You just wince when you read that, don't you?
He constantly is describing these very pointed beards, which makes me think, comes up with the idea of a claw or a sword or something violent.
So I'm gonna say that I think he is a hero too, more than an anti-hero. I think he's the hero of his own dream. And he moves through this world. I mean, I think you're right, Miriam, the way he misperceives things constantly is just, it's astounding how he can misinterpret things with such precision, coming up with the exact wrong conclusion, wrong perception, not having a good perception of himself. And, that scene of him throwing himself at that neighbor woman, when she's trying to escape from it. I find it so funny.
It is funny.
He uses the word comedy, like this is a comedy that he's going to play out early in the book. And I really read it as a kind of a tragic comedy. But the dream, the idea of being the hero is really there for me. I follow him as a hero. I mean, I want him to win. I want him to vanquish. He does all these things to try to take charge, but he's living in a dream, and the logic doesn't make sense. So he's constantly making mistakes or going to the wrong place or reliving things or having completely, just absurd. I mean, just the whole idea of the first meeting with Lenny, that he goes in there for a few minutes and he
Yeah,
comes out.
2 hours.
They waited around for an hour or two, and then he's been in the car outside for hours. It's like all of a sudden 5 hours went by and we don't know. I mean, there's so many things that are hilariously off about it to me, that make it really entertaining, despite the angst and alienation and dread and panic and fear of the whole situation. That I do see him as the hero, though, more than an anti-hero.
Well, I wonder about that though, because what did he do to be heroic? He didn't really effectively resist. He never really understood. And he basically just submitted and goes, okay, I'm going to die like a dog.
That's the definition of a victim.
That's the definition of a victim, as opposed to a hero. Yeah.
Well, he
and
was
maybe-
constantly trying to take charge of his own case. I mean, he had all these theories of how to fight the case and to stand up for himself and what he was going to do, and then firing the lawyer. All these things weren't, they were all done in order to try to win his case. So I think he was a hero trying to win, who couldn't defeat forces that were way larger, way larger than himself.
Yeah.
And but that makes him a tragic hero. But and you're gonna, Ben, you say inept or idiotic or whatever. I mean, in the face of a dream world, I think, yeah, that man is idiotic and inept and all that too. So, but no, I see what you're saying, Jay, that he's not heroic in the sense of a guy who can really take charge and win the day. But that to me doesn't mean he's not heroic. He's just facing something way bigger and with way less insight as to what he's really doing.
Did you all think that the real turning point for him was in the cathedral?
Yeah.
When he
Yes.
when he hears the judgment from the priest who says, your case is going very badly.
Yes.
And then he thinks of the authority of the priest, but also this guy is in this empty giant cathedral. He's called him by name. So it's kind of like, that's also, surreal. How would that happen? And then he listens to the guy, and then he tells him this parable, which I thought was so brilliant, but so bewildering. I mean, I didn't know what to think of it. I couldn't tell. All the suggestions put through, who is in power? Is the doorkeeper really the one in power, or is he a servant to the countrymen? And is the countryman just afraid of going in because of the other two doorkeepers? I mean, it went on, and it was all about situations in life that were just reduced to a sort of like a granular surface material, and you had to kind of my head was spinning with it, and I thought that's what he must have been doing. His head was spinning, but he had also lost a sense of the possibility of winning.
I have a question. Who thinks they could have done better than he did?
I think he could have done better.
You think no, but I'm saying, do you think you could have done better?
Oh,
Then who?
I would have wanted to do better, but it's a very good question. Would I have done better is different. I would, in my own mind, I would say yes, but that may be a very egotistical approach.
He had two men coming into his with badges, the whole idea of badge or whatever they were, and they represented real authority, and they stripped him basically of all of his power. He had no real great allies anywhere. So how irrational was he to fight even because he was getting beat up for no reason? We learned that from the first or second sentence. So we know he's innocent, but we also know that he can't win. So
Right.
who among us sounds like a biblical thing. Who among us would do better than Joseph K? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
I'm gonna forever hold my peace.
Okay.
So I'm going to answer that a little bit sideways, and it's back to a prior point that Mark was making, that why is there's a bit of a rebel in Joseph. He's completely ineffective, so he has zero success. But why the novel is so compelling is that I'm drawn into each of his absurd situations. And it's kind of like, okay, well, what would I do?
Yeah.
Is what seems to happen continuously. And so I think why the book has such legs is partly because he really is, we can identify, we're all living in the modern era, and in many ways, all of this is extremely possible. So it's a nightmare and it's his dream. So I don't really, it's kind of like, I'm not sure I can answer that I could do better in his dream than he did.
No,
as emasculated and ineffective as he was, and as idiotic as he was at times, I still admire him.
I agree. I use the word that I thought it was almost hypnotic, because you kept trying to identify, you couldn't just close the book and walk away from it, which was very bothersome. And maybe the most heroic thing that he could have done was ultimately take his own life rather than die like a dog.
Maybe he should have gotten an assault weapon.
Well, maybe he should have at least tried to fight back.
I can't help thinking, the story is many of the Jews who were in Germany during the time of the rise of the Nazis had, the notion to leave, and some did leave, but others did not leave. And I always asked myself about that, can you leave your furniture, your pet dog or whatever, and just pack a suitcase and flee and get out of the country, and sometimes people can't do that. And I always think of Joseph K. He could have left. He could have just packed up and fled. And that's what I asked myself. Would you flee?
I don't think the analogy works. It works best for German Jews, and it works best secondarily for Austrian Jews. But it doesn't work for all Jews, but it works somewhat. But where were they going to go? And where was Joseph going to go?
That's the question.
Where they were going to go? They were going to go to the Bronx.
Uh,
They were going to go to the Bronx.
No.
Joking,
no.
of course. They would have
I mean, there's no indication that,
That's his America novel.
yeah, there's no indication that this reality is not going to be exactly the same if he goes 100 miles away.
Yeah.
I know. But he accepts his fate, and that is what's so troubling. But I agree with you, Charlie. It's really not analogous, but it leads me to, to that question. Sometimes you can be in a very bad situation. You have the option to leave, but yet you don't.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. For sure.
All of those kinds of things.
I think that
Well, the
at
interesting thing
moments,
about-
go ahead, Mark.
One of the interesting things about the doorkeeper scene is that, he's thinking he does think that he could escape. That's his, when he's talking to the priest, he's thinking, and there's he says, maybe he could obtain decisive and acceptable counsel from him, which might, for instance, point the way, not towards some influential manipulation of the case, but towards a circumvention of it, a breaking away from it altogether, a mode of living completely outside the jurisdiction of the court. This possibility must exist. Kay had of late given much thought to it, and the priest must know.
Yeah.
So I think that that gets it into the into the religious part of it, and the whole idea of the gatekeeper, and the fact that there is no escape. So you to me, you can't say he's not heroic because there is no escape. He's even to that point still looking for the escape. And I don't think it's a weakness not to kill yourself either. I think he went bravely to his death, and just because he wasn't going to kill himself,
Listen,
I'm not going to hold against him.
I would hope to abandon this line of discussion about whether he's a hero or he's not a hero. What he is the main character of Kafka's novel. That's what he is.
Yeah. And I think that when he's asserting himself earlier, like in the second interrogation, and he walks over and looks at those books that are on the table, and he sees the pornographic image in one, and then he sees this horrible, stupid novel about how so-and-so did this to her husband. And then he has the notebook that the guy is keeping, and he picks it up like it's contaminated. And this is a very powerful moment for him. And he sees a reaction. And this is where he gets his hope that somehow this is getting through to them, that this is stupid and absurd, but it never goes anywhere. It may last for a second, but then the next thing they know, they say, you're doing yourself a great deal of damage by following this train of thought. And then he's back where he started.
Going back to the cathedral for a second, I don't know whether Kafka was taking a subtle swipe at the church or not. In effect, saying that the church was part of the system that was suppressing the people. Because as he leaves the priest, he goes, "You're the prison chaplain," and then he leaves.
I think the priest called himself the prison chaplain, but I do think you're right. And he's also, I think he's taking a swipe at both the church and Jewish religion at the same time, because the whole commentary business and the way of interpreting the interpretations and everything is completely circular, and that's a very Jewish approach to religion. So I think he's doing both. I think he's a satirist to a large degree, and he's taken down both at the same time.
Could be.
Boy, I'm really a contrarian tonight, but what the heck?
Go ahead.
There's a painting by Chagall, and I tell you, I bought it for my aunt, and I thought it was a real Chagall. I was 10 years old, and I bought it at Jordan Marsh.
Oh, wow.
And by the way, she hung it on the wall for her whole life. I mean, she loved that picture. But it was a picture of a religious Jewish man with snuff. He was putting snuff, and the color was green. And I never understood what it meant. And then I went to New York City, and the Museum of the Bible had it, the original. And it was about a third of the size as the one I bought. So I got a great buy. But it spoke about the power of the Orthodox Church, where Chagall, grew up in Belarus or wherever he was from. And it was, the green was the reflection of that church. So I believe that I don't think Kafka was talking about both religions. I think he was thinking about the fact of the oppression of being a minority of a minority of a minority. He was a German in Czechoslovakia who was a Jew that wasn't accepted and didn't accept his own community religiously. But the oppression, I don't think came in his mind, was from the Judaism. It was from the fact that he was always going to be an outsider. And I think that shows up in his, I hate to go back to always, Jewish themes, but when you read Jewish writers, you can't escape it any more than you could escape the Russian writer Tolstoy being the Russian themes or whichever. Anyhow, I'm a real contrarian tonight.
Well, I was going back to the cathedral. Toward the end of that chapter, Kay says, "The lie made into the rule of the world."
Becomes universal.
Right. But then the statement that the priest makes when Kay says, what do you want from me? Do you want anything else from me? And he says, you are the chaplain to the prison. And he said, therefore, I belong to the court. So why should I want anything from you? It receives you when you come, and it dismisses you when you go. To me, that is a meaningless statement. It just means this is what's going on, and it's exactly what you thought, or it's exactly what you didn't think. It doesn't say anything to me. Is it to you? I mean, am I just missing the point?
But that's the absurdity of the whole book.
Yeah, right. No, I know. I was amused to see an example of it again at the very end, just before the end.
I think that the Joseph K. is looking for some spiritual escape, some answer there. And I think Kafka, the writer, is looking for spirit, in his life, he was looking for spiritual, answers. I just think that he shows that ultimately they were empty in his view of things. And
right.
So that's the sense in which I think he's taking on both churches at once there.
I agree, and I want to just add that it takes me back to a comment I made at the beginning of tonight's meeting, in that all religion, because it is man-made, is corrupt. And so I agree with both interpretations, that I think Kafka's writing here is condemning both Judaism and Catholicism. But to step back for a second, I think that this chapter in the cathedral is so key. I remember I read the book the second time 10 years ago, but I didn't really remember what was going to happen next. And I was reading along, and again, it's very compelling. But when we got to oh my goodness, there's a chapter titled "In the Cathedral." Now we're going to get somewhere, right? Because in fact, now we're going to take it to a spiritual level. Now we're going to learn something, because this is not just a struggle in the material world. And so it made me think that, first of all, I don't think the word God was used in that chapter or anywhere in the book. All right, Jesus Christ is mentioned, the image of him, but God is not mentioned. And this is, again, quite modern, because it's kind of like, as Nietzsche and all modernists agree, God is dead. So the word itself does not enter into the book at all. And I'm gonna throw a curveball at you guys, because in some way I think the book turns into an immense allegory on modern man.
How about something different?
Exactly.
No. How about something different than that? How about the fact that this is a young man who knows he's dying, and he's writing about Kafka knows he's going to die. He knows he has. What's that?
Not when he wrote this, but
he didn't. Oh, okay, he didn't know it when he wrote that. Okay,
no,
I stand corrected and chagrined.
No, but he was a doomed kind of a person. So you're right. You go on with your point, because you're right.
I was thinking, yeah, he was like on a moving stairway, a moving walkway. He couldn't get off. I thought in his own life, but if he wasn't sick at that moment, maybe he just thought it was all hopeless anyhow for himself because he didn't know what he wanted or where he was going. And he certainly had some daddy issues, you know, so
So in the chapter in the cathedral, he refers to the law, capital L, frequently. And for those of us who've read the Old Testament, the law is Moses' law. It's also the 10 Commandments, but it's also the entire Pentateuch. And in fact, it's taken as a synonym for the Word of God. And so in the chapter in the cathedral, we are looking at the law, which isn't just this bureaucratic, totalitarian regime law, perhaps. Perhaps there's a what some might consider equally totalitarian, but a spiritual law.
You're talking about the parable.
I'm talking about the whole chapter.
Oh, okay.
Because
the law is, the guy's trying to get into the law.
Yeah, because exactly. So we're in the cathedral, they're talking about the law, and I'm saying, well, maybe they're talking about a different law than what we think at first. If you remember the first sentence of the book that I cited, someone must have been telling lies about Joseph K. for without having done anything wrong, he was arrested one fine morning. Now, we say, okay, that's true, because he's the narrator and whatnot, but wait a second, is Joseph K. guilty before God? Obviously. All right, so we all know that according to the law, we are all guilty before God. And so
no, we're not. Oh, no.
That's my interpretation then. So just read, so go with my interpretation.
I'm with you, kid. I'll follow you down the road.
And so what we have is, in some ways, Joseph K. is in denial. He's a modern.
I agree with you. He has received the sentence, and he is just guilty. And he's innocent, but he's guilty anyway.
Well, he thinks he's innocent, but at least in the New Testament, let's say, the basis of any redemption is admitting guilt, for we all have sinned, according to the New Testament. So without going into any Old Testament stuff, now the priest yells at him. It says, and at that the priest shrieked from the pulpit, "Can't you see anything at all?" It was an angry cry, but at the same time sounded like the involuntary shriek of one who sees another fall and is startled out of himself. And again, the priest is not can be both revealing himself as a corrupt member of the court, and he also can be speaking a certain truth at the same time. And that Joseph, he's guilty, and he won't admit it. And he's a very modern man. He's post-Nietzsche, and there he goes. And so the book is a long meditation on that, is a possible interpretation. So go for it.
Well, back in the very beginning, when Franz and Willem come to his room, right at the beginning, the first interrogation, Franz says to Willem, he admits he doesn't know the law, and at the same time, he insists he's innocent. So this goes along with your theory, because it's, he doesn't know the law, but he insists he's innocent, but in fact, he's really guilty. I'm not going along with you yet, but I'm just saying that feeds into your argument.
So I'm gonna take a different tact on it though, Ben, because I'm gonna use Kay's words. But I'm not guilty. It's a mistake. And if it comes to that, how can any man be called guilty? We're all simply men here, one as much as the other. And the priest goes, that is true, but that's how all guilty men talk. So the logical absurdity of being able to ever escape that leads me to interpret the whole thing more in light of his comments in the end, where he talks about, the only thing is to go on doing is to keep my intelligence calm and analytical to the end, for whatever that's worth. And I'm grateful for the fact that these half-dumb, senseless creatures have been sent to accompany me on the journey, and that I have been left to say to myself all that is needed. So that's sort of I take away more of an individualistic moral from it, not the sense that he's really guilty for something he did, but rather it's a human condition. So I think that's different from the take that you're putting on it, even though it's there's definitely a religious theme that is confronted head on in the cathedral. And I think you could probably have all kinds of interpretations of Kafka. And as the Jewish sage Dennis used to say, you're right and you're right. But Rabbi, how can they both be right? You're right.
On the other hand,
Kafka doesn't use the word God, but he does refer to a judge whom no one's ever sees.
That's right.
That there is
Yeah.
an ultimate judge that we do not see.
Right.
And I just took that as, his reference to some sort of God, some sort of ultimate. This book has one of the most wonderful descriptions of obsessions that I've ever read. This is, Kafka says this, so the lawyer's methods, to which Kay unfortunately had not been long enough exposed, amounted to this, that the client finally forgot the whole world and lived only in hope of toiling along this false path until the end of his case should come in sight. The client ceased to be a client and became the lawyer's dog. If the lawyer were to order this man to crawl under the bed as if into a kennel and bark there, he would gladly obey. I thought this was wonderful. The description of that the whole world disappears except for this one thing. And
Yeah.
there is nothing else. In a way, that's what this novel is.
Yeah. And that's what Dickens does in Jarndyce versus Jarndyce.
In
That's
Bleak
the whole thing.
House. In Bleak
Yeah.
House, yeah.
It just ends up destroying and sucking every bit of money out of
Right.
both families, and then it's over.
Everything, every penny. So this is a wonderful description of obsession.
Yeah.
There's another characteristic of this penultimate chapter, particularly towards the end of it, there's a lot of darkness. At one point, but in the darkness, he can now perceive a radiance that streams immortally from the door of the law. So that's like the one positive statement, perhaps, about the law, which again, I don't see as at all positive overall in this book. But you remember at the very end, the poor Joseph is left in the dark by the priest.
Yeah.
And he goes, but I can't find my way alone in this darkness.
Right.
He complains.
Yeah.
And so that's our final image of him before the end, the last chapter, that he's not going to get any help from that religion.
No, and there's one place in the chapter that really struck me, and most of us have been in these vast cathedrals, and this was wonderful. Kay felt a little forlorn as he advanced, a solitary figure between the rows of empty seats, perhaps with the priest's eyes following him. And the size of the cathedral struck him as bordering on the limit of what human beings could bear.
The subjectivity is wonderful.
Oh,
He's
wonderful.
tiptoes out and the sound is echoing everywhere, and then he races back at a full run. It's just, yeah,
This,
I marked that line too. It's really amazing. His perceptions are astounding.
and those cathedrals are vast.
When they're empty.
And they're empty, and they're very, very different from, kind of a smallish synagogue.
Yeah.
So the vastness of it. Very strange, very disquieting. And he a forlorn figure in this vast space.
Of course, the vastness is supposed to be awe-inspiring,
Hmm.
not alienating.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
One more irony. Robert mentioned the midrashes and all the commentaries, and I think that that's a very insightful comment on what the book seems. So I can imagine that Kafka knew quite well a lot of that. There's something that comes up in the New Testament that the Pharisees and the Sadducees are condemned not just as hypocrites, but as overly legalistic. And this novel is just like one nonstop legal case of the law, right? Like, how am I going to go with the law that I don't even, how am I going to get out, do this, do that, use this procedure, use this influencer, do whatever. So it's this impossible struggle against a law that he has no idea about, really, in the end.
And there's no way of predicting it. There was a moment at the end of the chapter 9 in the cathedral, but I can't recall now whether it was the priest who said it or was it about the countryman and the doorkeeper. But he offered a gift, and then the statement is, "I'm only accepting this so that you don't think there's anything you failed to do."
That was the doorkeeper.
The doorkeeper. I mean, it's like what a statement of uselessness, you know.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm taking it only just so you feel good, because it's like not going to do any good, but you think it was important, so I'll do it.
Hey, but
Before we crash the party, I have a 30-second thing to show, if you would let me show my screen.
Yeah.
Sure.
I found I was reading a book by a filmmaker named Jaworski, and he did a series of comic panels, one-page comic panels in the 60s, late 60s and early 70s. And the very first one seems to me to be a one-page summary of the trial. So, okay, thank you, Ben. So I'll have to read it because it's not so clear, but it's called Panic Fables. And it's at age 7, he discovers a machine in the garden. I don't know how it works. Wow. At age 14, he returns to the garden, which is now a park. The machine is bigger. I can't get it to work. Time passes. Each time I come back, the apparatus and the vegetation have grown. Now the man has grown old. The machine is infinite. I will go inside it. I walk through miles of tubes and it won't ever turn on. Near death. This wheel is bigger than a skyscraper. What is this machine for? What happened? I'm in the garden again. Oh, now I know what it's for. I just have to move this lever to make this stiletto come out and pierce my heart.
That's a cheerful way to end this.
I like it. That was sort of the trial in a one page.
Well done. Well done.
Very good.
And just not only does the gatekeeper take something willingly for his own good at the end, but at the very beginning, again, in that absurd, completely compelling drawing in first chapter, speaking of the two wardens, but they both examined his nightshirt and said that he would have to wear a less fancy shirt now, but that they would take charge of this one and the rest of his underwear. And if his case turned out well, restore them to him later.
Well, we find out during the flogger chapter that doesn't really suit them very well.
Exactly. But it seems to make perfect sense at the time because Joseph doesn't make a peep.
Right. I've got more important things to think about than my underwear.
Like what it's covering.
Right.
Don't his executioners at the end take his clothes off?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really horrible.
So.
Well,
And
kids,
late-
I'm going to say goodnight. I've got to go. I think we're time pretty much.
Charles, before you go,
Great choice, Jay.
Yes.
I don't know if you can see it. This is
Yeah.
Tokayo.
Oh, yeah,
This is what? Sorry.
Tokayo.
Tokayo, the
Oh.
book I was talking about.
And if I can't find it, I know where you are.
Absolutely. I'll be glad
Thank you,
to
my,
lend it to you.
And Jay,
thank you, my friend.
Jay-
Thank you. Thank
Jay,
you.
great pick questions, and it's your first time leading, moderating, and remember, we're like a herd of cats. Brilliantly done. Thank you very much. I want to encourage you to do it again.
It was very nice. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you
you,
all.
Jay.
See you, Charlie.
And who's up next time?
I think I am with Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse.
Oh, right,
Ah,
good, good,
okay.
good.
Okay, no more darkness. To the lighthouse.
To the Lighthouse, a very good book, very good.
Be well, everybody.
You-
And to all those who celebrate, happy Easter. Happy Easter.
Did Charlie,
Well.
did you get your vaccinations?
I'm a two-time I can date now. Don't tell my wife.
Ah,